Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's roundtable discussion at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers, co-hosted by the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs. I'm Indu Saxena, the Deputy Director with the Consortium. We at CIPR are very pleased to host this roundtable discussion focusing on Islamic State Khorasan with our fantastic panelists. First, I would like to thank and appreciate Major Phil Caruso for joining us today despite his personal loss. Thank you, Major Caruso. For today's discussion, we have a team of experts on international security and terrorism studies. Our esteemed speakers are Dr. Aisa Siddiqa, Major Phil Caruso, Dr. Hayat Alvi, Dr. Adil Rashid, and Dr. Ernest Gunasekara Rockwell. We will be hosting soon the next roundtable discussion in this series, so please stay tuned in. First of all, I would like to invite Dr. Ernest Gunasekara Rockwell, Director of the Consortium, to tell a bit about the Consortium.
Thank you, Indu. The Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers was an initiative that we began earlier this year, back in February. We continued to grow and grow since standing up the journal back in 2018. And, we got to the point where we were, instead of printing 96 pages per issue, we'd moved into a lot of digital only material. And it had simply become too cumbersome for the small team that we had to be able to tackle that initiative on a quarterly basis and also keep up with all the special issues that we were running. And so we stood this up, just kind of threw out an invitation on LinkedIn for those that might be interested in joining us on a volunteer basis. Didn't expect a tremendous outpouring, but it's exactly what I got. We got about 100 applications just in that first month alone. And, through interviews and whatnot, we whittled that down to about 50. And we've grown over the last couple of months to about 60. And we have, we've divided it up into different teams. So we have research and writing teams, we have editing teams, we have a special events team that does things of this nature, which is really proving to be a new avenue for us. It's helped us reach a much wider audience. So all volunteer think tank that's engaged in all sorts of different things in the Indo-Pacific, and with members from all throughout the Indo-Pacific. We've got folks from India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Japan, Korea, Australia, and we're always looking to add to that too. So if there's anybody out there that's interested in joining, please just drop us an email and let us know, and we'll see what we can do to work you into the team. We've got plenty of work to keep everyone busy, so we're always looking for fresh blood. But again, thank you, and thank you to our panelists for being here, and thank you for our audience as well. Look forward to a very interesting and lively debate. Thank you. Back to you, Indu.
Thanks, Doc. Moving ahead, first, please allow me to introduce today's distinguished speakers. We have Dr. Aisa Siddiqa. Dr. Aisa Siddiqa is a PhD in war studies from King's College London. She is currently a research associate at the School of Oriental and African Studies, London, and she is the author of 2 books on Pakistan military. She is currently working on a 3rd book on the socio-politics of militancy and extremism in South Asia and its link with West Asia. She was the inaugural Pakistan Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, a Ford Fellow at BICC Germany, a Fellow at the Cooperative Monitoring Center, Sandia National Laboratories, and the Charles Wallace Fellow at St. Anthony's College, Oxford. Dr. Siddiqa has also taught at Johns Hopkins University and University of Pennsylvania. She also served in Pakistan Navy as Director of Naval Research. Our next speaker is Major Phil Caruso. Major Caruso is a Deputy Military Advisor, Military Staff Committee, Deputy Directorate for Counter Threats and International Cooperation, Director for Strategy, Plans and Policy, Joint Staff, U.S. Mission to the United Nations, New York. Throughout his career, he has specialized in foreign policy, defense and security strategy, intelligence, and force protection. He received his commission through the Air Force Air Reserve Officer Training Corporation from 2008 to 2015. Major Caruso served on active duty as a special investigation officer. From 2015 to the present, he has served in the Air Force Reserve as an intelligence officer and political military affairs strategist. He deployed to Afghanistan twice in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He has earned his Juris Doctor cum laude from Harvard Law School, Cambridge in 2019 and Master of Business Administration with distinction from Harvard Business School, Boston. He has completed his Master of Military Operational Art and Science with the highest academic distinction, Air Command and Staff College, Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama in 2020. Our next speaker is Dr. Hayat Alvi. Dr. Alvi is an associate professor in the National Security Affairs Department at the U.S. Naval War College. She has served as the Director of International Study at Arcadia University and taught political science at the American University in Cairo, Egypt from 2001 to 2005. She also spent a year in Damascus, Syria as a Fulbright Fellow. She is the author of many books, includes her recently published Nonviolent Activism in Islam, The Message of Abul Kalam Azad. Our next speaker is Dr. Adil Rashid. Dr. Adil Rashid is a research fellow and the coordinator of the Counterterrorism Center at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Strategic Studies and Analysis. He is the author of the books Countering the Radical Narrative and ISIS Race to Armageddon. He is writing a new book on the cross-current of political Islam in West Asia and South Asia. His research papers, namely Countering the Threat of Radicalization, Theories, Program and Challenges, as well as Jihadist Radicalization in India, Internal Challenges, External Threats, are widely read in the Indian strategic community. A student of Islamic theology and history, he writes extensively for Indian and international media organizations, participates at various national and international seminars, and gives orientation lectures for the officers and personnel of various Indian security agencies. We have Dr. Ernest Gunasekara Rockwell. Dr. Gunasekara Rockwell is the director of the consortium. He is a cross-disciplinary scholar, editor, writer, researcher, and administrator with a multivariate background in publishing, social sciences, languages, writing, editing, teaching, and international security. Now, may I invite Dr. Hayat Alvi for her presentation. Please type your questions for the QA session in the chat section. Dr. Alvi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this roundtable. I'm going to begin by mentioning that everything I say represents my personal views. I also want to make reference to a particular documentary that I use quite a bit in my talk, and the resource for that is the title ISIS in Afghanistan, and it is produced by Frontline PBS, and the date it was broadcast was November 17, 2015. And the presenter is Najibullah Qureshi, a prominent journalist who does several Frontline PBS documentaries about Afghanistan. Let me begin by talking about the origins of ISIS Khorasan province, or ISIS-K or ISIS-KP. Let's begin with understanding that ISIS has proliferated global networks with affiliated cells operating on practically every continent. As early as June 2014, some Afghan and Pakistani Taliban members defected to ISIS in Afghanistan. The impetus was the establishment of the ISIS Caliphate in Syria and Iraq. ISIS-K came to be known as the ISIS cell present in Afghanistan. And an important incentivizer, if I can use that, for the locals and particularly disaffected Afghan Taliban members is that ISIS-K pays more money. The documentary cites about $700 a month. Now, according to the NPR, article, and here I'm quoting, ISIS had sent representatives to both Pakistan and Afghanistan. They were essentially able to co-opt some disaffected Pakistani Taliban and a few Afghan Taliban members to join their cause, unquote. The article goes on to say that in a 2015 video, the group's leader at the time, Hafiz Saeed Khan, and other top commanders pledged their allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who at the time was Islamic State's leader, and declared themselves administrators of a new ISIS territory in Afghanistan. The NPR article goes on to say that the hostility between the two groups, that is ISIS-K and the Taliban, arose both from ideological differences and competition for resources. ISIS accused the Taliban of drawing its legitimacy from a narrow ethnic and nationalistic base rather than a universal Islamic creed, unquote. Also, according to the Associated Press, the Taliban sought to negotiate with the United States in recent years. Many of those opposed to talks, these are the talks in Doha, switched over to the more extremist Islamic State. And current estimates show about 2,000 ISIS-K or ISIS Khorasan fighters operating in Afghanistan. So, to get into more details about what is ISIS-K, let's look at its specific semantics and wording. When ISIS, when it had its headquarters in Raqqa, Syria, it proliferated its satellite cells globally, but especially in the Middle East, parts of Africa, and parts of South Asia. And each cell had a name given, and the name is according to the translation of whatever name and the province. So, for example, ISIS-K is ISIS Khorasan province. In Arabic, Wilayat Khorasan, or the province of Khorasan, which includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Central Asian states. In the documentary, we see an ISIS-K operative say the following quote, "We want the Islamic system all over the world and we will fight for it," unquote. ISIS-K links itself with the broader ISIS Caliphate and its leadership. It is not an autonomous entity in Afghanistan. That is, ISIS territories are part of the Caliphate. Again, to quote an ISIS operative from the documentary, quote, "Our commanders get orders from the Islamic State," unquote. ISIS-K calls the Afghan Taliban, quote, "puppets of Pakistan," unquote. ISIS-K claims that the Taliban do not accept the ISIS Caliphate. They, quote, "take orders from Pakistani intelligence," unquote. ISIS-K claims that foreign fighters are joining them, unlike the Taliban. However, the Taliban retort that we are already Islamic. And that's a quote again from the documentary. A pivotal moment came in summer of 2014 when about a dozen village elders and Taliban commanders were executed by ISIS-K. And ISIS-K released a video of these captives being executed by being blown up. This marks the beginning of the ISIS-K versus Taliban rivalry. I'll take a moment to talk about the common ideological variables between ISIS-K and the Afghan Taliban. The Taliban and ISIS-K target Afghan government and foreign forces. They are the common enemies of the Taliban and ISIS-K. Both have similar Sunni extremist, Salafi, Wahhabi ideological foundations. And for the Taliban, we can add an additional ideological influence, and that comes from Deobandism, which is quite prominent in South Asia. Both the Taliban and ISIS-K are takfiri. Takfiri means that they give themselves the authority to deem another person or group of people as non-believers or apostates, that is, those who have left Islam. Therefore, they are subject under these groups' interpretations to the death penalty. So that's what takfiri means. Both indoctrinate children and train them to be fighters and operatives. Both ISIS-K and the Taliban operate religious seminaries in which they indoctrinate children. Therefore, schools play a very important role in their jihads. These are essentially Islamist military jihadist schools, and ISIS in particular disseminates their school videos for propaganda purposes. The Taliban and ISIS-K continue to perpetuate a never-ending war in Afghanistan, and the people of Afghanistan continue to suffer. Local Afghan civilians are fed up with both the Taliban and ISIS-K. Some local communities have set up local militias for their security against the Taliban and ISIS-K. That might be changing now that the Taliban have taken control of the country. Let me now talk a bit about the ideologies of ISIS-K and the Taliban with respect to women and girls. Both ISIS-K and the Taliban fear females as a source of temptation. Therefore, it is imperative to render females, quote, invisible, unquote, in public space. Hence, we see the strict dress code being imposed on females. The belief on the part of both organizations, ISIS-K and the Taliban, is that temptations will lead to sinful acts. Males are viewed as having custodial authority over females. That is why females are required to have male relatives or spouses accompany females in public. This is very similar to Saudi Wahhabism. And Saudi Arabia had a direct role in influencing the ideological curricula in Islamic seminaries during the fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. Those Islamic seminaries have proliferated in the Afghan-Pakistan border region. Women are treated as second class or worse in these societies, according to the interpretations of Islamic law by ISIS and the Taliban, and for that matter, Wahhabism in general. So to wrap up, due to counterterrorism operations targeting them, ISIS-K has been forced to scatter and decentralize quite a bit within Afghanistan, but it still carries out indiscriminate attacks like the suicide bombings at the Kabul airport gate on August 26th that killed more than 160 Afghan civilians and 13 US military personnel. This attack begs the question, why did the Taliban fail in heeding intelligence warnings about an imminent attack? The bottom line is that ISIS wants blood. It thrives on bloodshed, as described in this quote from the documentary. Quote, ISIS wants a river of blood. Faith and belief demand blood. God will expand this beautiful caliphate everywhere. Unquote. Thank you for listening.
ability to mount transit. So the question now becomes, aside from what ISIS-K is today, what are the Taliban going to do about ISIS-K? What is the international community going to do about ISIS-K? What are the capabilities to do that? So let me start with the Taliban for a couple of minutes. The Taliban historically have clashed with ISIS-K in pretty much all the areas that they've come into contact with each other, as others have said, and others will continue to say even on this call. The Taliban see ISIS-K as a threat. ISIS-K has clearly articulated a desire to control territory at the expense of the Taliban's consolidation of control. The difference now is that with the Taliban having taken control of the country, it gives them a strategic and tactical advantages, I would say, in terms of their ability to deploy military capability against the ISIS-K problem. Prior to the collapse of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces and the withdrawal of international forces, the Taliban were still very much focused on conquest of the country and defeating the government, as well as U.S. forces. And ISIS-K was a serious threat, but it was not the type of existential threat, at least as long as the U.S. was putting pressure on them, that the Taliban needed to confront immediately and shift resources to. They're obviously now in a much stronger position to shift resources to focus on ISIS-K. They are supported by foreign fighters and some other military units that they've sourced from abroad. The Taliban are fighting a resistance movement in the Panjshir Valley right now, but have the manpower and the weapons and equipment to turn their focus to ISIS-K in places like Nangarhar, Kunar Province, Nuristan, some of the others where ISIS-K has started to proliferate at a relatively small scale. So I think it remains to be seen, though, when and how the Taliban are going to deal with this problem. ISIS-K remains underground to a significant extent. It does not control territory as it once did in 2015, 2016, and 2017. The last piece I would talk about is just how the U.S. Is going potentially to confront ISIS-K. ISIS-K, as I said, represents an international threat. It's a regional threat. Regional actors, because of their own security interests, are incentivized to continue collecting intelligence on ISIS-K and to share it with partners, both regionally and abroad. I think there's a question as to what degree will Afghanistan's neighbors get involved in the fight against ISIS-K, or whether or not they may supply the Taliban with weapons and equipment, or provide intelligence assistance as well to help the Taliban enable the Taliban to fight ISIS-K. But the United States will also, I think, continue to evaluate ISIS-K as a threat, could collect intelligence, especially in signals intelligence, given the lack of footprint on the ground against ISIS-K. And where ISIS-K is developing a capability that it is international or transnational in nature, and that threatens a strike, including the kinds of significant and advanced types of attacks that Al-Qaeda once planned from Afghanistan, the United States will strike. That will come in the form of over-the-horizon capabilities, given the limited presence the U.S. has in the region. Most likely, I would say the most likely tool is going to be drones and ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities coming out of the Persian Gulf region, which give the United States the ability to strike specific targets. In a potentially more significant scenario, the use of ground forces, special operations forces, to enter the country and pursue a specific type of target if that risk is justified. However, I think that's a fairly small probability. I think that the way forward is going to look something like the Taliban turning their attention to ISIS-K, potentially provided intelligence and weapons and assistance from regional actors who see ISIS-K as a threat, including Pakistan, for example, and Taliban focus on stamping out ISIS-K's presence. However, I think we will continue to see ISIS-K attacks, even on Taliban targets, including using suicide bombers and the types of kind of high casualty generating and media media friendly types of attacks that attract a lot of attention, including international attention, but that are difficult to disrupt. So I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions later. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Major Caruso, for your wonderful presentation and telling us about the counterterrorism operations and capabilities. And your defense perspective is valuable. And we sent our deep condolences to your personal loss. Thank you for joining us today. I will take some questions on defense perspective. If you are here, please feel free to drop anytime. Thank you. Now, our next panelist is Dr. Aisa Siddiqa. She's here, and I welcome her. And my apology to Dr. Caruso and Siddiqa if they had any inconvenience in login. Dr. Aisa Siddiqa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions that came in, and I'm happy to address real quick. The first one on Iranian and Baluchis participating in ISIS-K operations. So ISIS-K operations, so in terms of the populations that they're drawing from, right? So ISIS-K does have a significant presence of foreign fighters and has relationships with multiple groups in the region, including those that have traditionally been involved in resistance types of movements, right? So those are sources of fighters for them, as well as friendly relationships. I don't know that the international community or the intelligence community has a clear picture of the degree to which those relationships are cooperative or actively facilitating any kind of assistance, as well as what the strength of the recruitment is. I think ISIS-K as a group, just broadly speaking, tends not to get along with other groups, and its objectives and interests it typically views as a zero-sum game. In other words, the Taliban and the ISIS-K, for example, have a lot in common in terms of their vision for what life in Afghanistan should be like. However, the fact is that they cannot coexist as power exerting entities on the population, because there can only be one religious authority. And so I think you see it with ISIS-K. I think you see that dynamic play out with other groups as well. And so even though it may have relationships that are born of practicality or necessity at various points in time, I think it's my perspective is that the Taliban are far more likely to have constructive and cooperative and concerning, in some cases, relationships with other groups in the region than ISIS-K. And that takes me to a second question around Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K. Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K, from generally speaking, from what we know, don't get along for some of the reasons I just mentioned, but also because it's really it's a very different set of goals, right? The Al-Qaeda has been an internationally focused organization that has not taken its eye off the fact that planning and conducting international attacks, especially in the West and the US and Europe, that is their number one priority. It is not controlling territory or exerting control over the Afghan people. which ISIS-K, even though they have the capability to plan those kinds of attacks, they are very much focused on taking territory, controlling that territory, and implementing their vision for what the caliphate should look like. And that being their priority puts them at odds with Al-Qaeda. The second thing is that ISIS-K, as I mentioned, because they frankly don't get along with other groups, and there's a lot of violent friction, including with the Taliban, who have long been the gracious hosts to Al-Qaeda. That the network and the system of alliances and relationships just naturally puts ISIS-K as sort of an isolated entity. Like I said, that doesn't mean ISIS-K doesn't have relationships with groups throughout the region. It just means that loosely speaking, ISIS-K is more of an independent and isolated entity than any other group in the region, including the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who continue to this day to have a fairly strong relationship that is mutually supportive. The role of Pakistan, I think Pakistan has already demonstrated that it's going to support the Taliban as the natural government of Afghanistan. We've already seen reports of Pakistani fighters, weapons and arms, and even aircraft participating in the Taliban campaign in the Panjshir Valley, which suggests that Pakistan wants to see the Taliban consolidate power in Afghanistan and become a reliable partner of some kind to them. For that reason, I think it's in Pakistan's interest to help the Taliban fight ISIS-K and degrade their capabilities. And I think we'll continue to see that. I don't think, however, that Pakistan is going to play a role as a U.S. ally in pursuing these kinds of interests. I think these interests are largely Pakistan's. And though Pakistan may serve as a helpful diplomatic conduit to the Taliban when the U.S. needs to engage the Taliban on one issue or another, I don't think Pakistan is likely to ever host U.S. troops or drones or intelligence capabilities. I don't think Pakistan is going to, proactively share any kind of intelligence information. And so while Pakistan's interests dovetail with the United States, and that is in the United States' favor, I think, especially as it relates to ISIS-K, it doesn't mean it's going to be a deeply cooperative or supportive relationship as it had been, I think, well, I wouldn't say it had ever been deeply supportive or cooperative, but there had been a much steadier and more stable, relationship in terms of security cooperation back in the 2000s. Let's see here. A few other questions. So, support to ISIS-K from neighboring countries. Yes, ISIS-K is present in neighboring countries. To a smaller degree. The ISIS-K has mounted attacks on border outposts in Tajikistan. I believe it was last year and the year before. So they do have a presence in Tajikistan. It is a smaller presence. I mean, probably in the double digits of fighters. So not something on the scale of what we saw in Afghanistan. And there also doesn't seem to be the same level of capability in terms of being able to, conduct suicide vehicle-borne IED attacks, et cetera. But it does exist. I think that the nature of border closures because of refugee flows and COVID-19 has made it more difficult for ISIS-K to proliferate in terms of, sending fighters abroad, sending weapons and materiel abroad. And so that's slowed ISIS-K's growth. But it is a problem, and the neighboring countries, especially in Central Asia, are very aware of it and are actively fighting it. Infighting between ISIS-K and the Taliban. I think the complete peace in Afghanistan, in terms of there not being an active conflict against some group or another, is probably not something we should expect in the near term. We'll see how long the Panjshir Valley can hold out. They're receiving some support from Tajikistan, according to open source reports, but not more broadly from the international community or the West. So it's unclear how long that conflict is going to last or to play out. And then, of course, ISIS-K is not going away either, and the Taliban are going to have to continue to launch their own pressure campaign against ISIS-K. I think the question is, to what degree? I think what remains to be seen is the degree to which ISIS-K has the capability and the willingness to mount attacks against Taliban targets and against civilian Afghan targets in Afghanistan. Like I said, the airport attack shows that they have the capability to do it. We don't know necessarily how much and how frequently they can do it, and what kinds of targets they're going to attack now that international forces have left. So time will tell, but I think some level of violence should be expected to continue.
Thank you, Major Caruso, for taking the
Yep.
question. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Aisa Siddiqa.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I didn't realize that my mic was mute, and therefore Paul Caruso didn't know that I had actually started to speak. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. Very quickly, there are three things which I'd like to point out. Firstly, that it's been about 4 weeks that Taliban have come into power. Yet there isn't a battle. I don't see a battle happening between Taliban and ISK. There are no attacks from either side. That's one. Secondly, it's interesting that it's also important to point out that despite this conversation that Pakistan and other states are supporting Taliban versus ISK, it's also important to point out that people like Shafiq Mangal, who are from Balochistan and have joined Daesh, they have very close linkage with with Pakistan's ISI. So I'm still trying to get my head around the disconnect between ISK and Pakistani intelligence, or that Pakistani intelligence completely supports the Taliban. But thirdly, I think it's also important to point out that the Hazaras, we talk about different levels of violence between ISK and Taliban, but when we look at minority groups like Hazaras and Shias, both Taliban and Hazaras have attacked, and Taliban and ISK have attacked Hazaras and Shias. In fact, if you care to look at the report from the High Commissioner Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, UN Human Rights, there is entire data, a whole list of attacks. Yeah, there are fewer attacks by the Taliban on the Hazaras and Shias and greater from the ISK, yet there has been one instance in 2018 in which both Taliban and ISK came together to attack the Hazaras. So on many issues, there are these commonalities. Personally, I would like to contextualize this whole debate, because right now what it seems is that an argument is almost being made as if Taliban and ISK are very different. Two very different entities with different objectives and which would result in a totally different outcome for Afghanistan. One is likely to bring more peace, other is going to bring more violence, or one is going to bring a softer form of political Islam, another may be harder. And that is something in my 5 minutes that I have, I'm going to kind of try to question that and make, and question, that assumption here. Agreed that ISK and Taliban are different at 4 levels. Organizationally, of course, they're different. ISK developed as a different entity. They have difference in objectives. For ISK, for instance, in terms of objectives, want the Khilafat first and the state to go with it, as compared to Taliban who have a base, who belong to the area, who want and who can actually have greater power to acquire the state. I mean, they already have a state. They had control of the state from 1996 to 2001. So that way there is, lesser insecurity as compared to ISK. And of course, Khilafat, Khilafah, I mean, Mullah Umar was considered as the Imam, and that debate is less intense, but amongst the Taliban, but it is definitely there. They want a Khalifa, they want somebody who's control of the state, and they are not necessarily, again, ISK does it, but in a different fashion. I do not think that even Taliban are committed to a democratic system of governance, which the West is familiar with. I don't think they're very inclined to hold elections. They will have a Sharia-based system, probably a different form of governance than what the world is comfortable with. A third level where they're different is fiqh, which is Sharia, which is law. ISK is Salafi, but so is Al Qaeda. I mean, both are Salafi, and I will kind of get into that conversation very soon on where the differences are. Why I don't think that this whole argument about ISK being very different from the rest of the organization, even from Al Qaeda. I mean, I was recently looking at then a fourth. Finally, the fourth difference is on Aqidah, which is principles of faith. This is definitely a Salafi organization, but so is Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is organizationally different from IS, and I also came across argument recently made by Cambridge scholar Ori Goldberg, arguing that Al Qaeda is different from ISK. Even Al Qaeda is different from ISK because Al Qaeda is more pragmatic, and it engages with other militant groups, unlike ISK. But I would like to remind that ISK is as much Salafi as Al Qaeda, and in historical context, I would like to remind participants and people who are listening to the discussion that Al Qaeda, despite being Salafi, despite having a different Aqidah, principles of faith, did come and work with Taliban. I mean, it cooperated, it coordinated with Mullah Umar. In fact, Mullah Umar went to a great length to protect Osama bin Laden. They have cooperated and worked together. So ISK as an organization is, of course, pushing its way forward. Its main attraction was around the time 2014-15. And 2014-15, when there were a number of things. At that point in time, ISK brought in money, for instance, and that's why, I mean, it was bigger attraction. But secondly, around 2014 to 2016, when it established itself, that was a period when a lot of new Taliban fighters were dissatisfied with lesser action from their own leadership. And that younger generation is still around. I mean, interestingly, we have been fed on this discourse that Taliban, the whole argument around America negotiating with the Taliban was based on this premise that even the Taliban were tired of war and therefore they wanted to negotiate peace. And this is what I want to challenge, that of course, Taliban want peace, but Taliban also wanted control of government, and they also wanted control of that state. And there is no instance here where Taliban have actually changed their mode of governance, or they have given up violence in order to accommodate peace and accommodate a different formula of governance. So I don't see that Taliban have made, in fact, this narrative, they have benefited from this narrative of Taliban wanting peace. It has brought control of the government to them. It has allowed, in fact, Americans to step back and allow the Taliban to take control of the Afghan state. So going back, I would say that ISK, being an organization, is and Salafi, I mean, some of the leadership, earlier leadership that of ISK, people like Muslim Dost. I mean, Muslim Dost got trained not in Saudi Arabia, although he joined ISK and he pledged allegiance to to the ISK Caliph. But the fact of the matter is, he was trained in a Lashkar-e-Taiba madrasa in Peshawar, and those that trained him, they were Salafis. They were Salafis from Pakistan. And let me also remind you that there are different forms and patterns of Salafis that you'll find between Pakistan and Afghanistan. These are people who have been, in fact, some of the people who trained Muslim Dost, for instance, were exactly the leadership who were behind, who were motivators of the siege of Mecca in 1979. And therefore, those influences did not come from Saudi Arabia, but were very much homegrown. So my final argument, I'll wrap up, my discussion. What I'm saying is that I think we need to think very carefully before trying to push this case of there being a very clear distinction between ISK and Taliban. There is at different levels, yet that is not likely to stop them from either going after the Hazaras or other minorities, or pushing for a Sharia-based system, which, and a system of governance which is totally different from what the world desires. I don't think that, and also that the possibility of cooperation between the Taliban and ISK remains. Right now we are seeing this conflict, but this is not a conflict which is etched, which may be permanent. There are groups amongst the Taliban who have joined ISK, earlier, and they're likely to, go back and forth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqa, for your wonderful presentation that you told us about the principle of faith, like Salafi, Aqidah, and Caliphate. What's the difference between these terrorist groups and what they understand all about that? And I would quote your argument that is Taliban tired of war, then can international community understand that Taliban is capable of govern, or can Taliban run the government? So thank you. I will take more on questions from you. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Adil Rashid. Dr. Adil Rashid, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible to all of you? Right. One of the advantages of having listened to a bevy of international scholars is, and to be the last speaker, is that you get a lot of pointers, and sometimes you feel like moving away from your script and dealing with the issues which they have raised up. And so the first thing which I would like to say, and I would like to take a few of the things which Dr. Aisha Siddiqa just mentioned, not further. I would like to say that, but that I would leave to the script which I have written, but I'll come to the more important aspects first. The Taliban are Devbandi Hanafis, and the Salafis are against the Hanafis. They are fundamentally against the person Abu Hanifa, who first codified Islamic law, and they question the locus standi of Abu Hanifa. So although both are Sunnis, extreme Salafis like ISIS are against the law, the legal system of the Sunni Islam, which comes from the Hanafi code, the code of Abu Hanifa. And Russia was very good in exploiting this difference when in 2015 it held a conference in Grozny where it said, who is the Sunni Muslim? That was the title of that conference, in which they excluded the Salafi Wahhabis without mentioning them among the various subsects of Sunni Islam. So this is something which is very fundamental, which we should understand when Russia and others are exploiting the wedges between these doctrinal wedges between these groups for strategic purposes. And that is sometimes not knowing theological differences can come in our way of trying to make strategic decisions. The other thing which I would like to say here is that as Dr. Siddiqa very rightly pointed out, to make too much of these differences also can be a problem, especially in the context of Afghanistan. And so I will be presenting some of my own views on what is happening right now in Afghanistan. And most of these views are also shared by the Indian intelligence community. And wherever there is something new and welcome you find, you can attribute it to me. And wherever you find something objectionable, you can just put it on the wider community of Indian strategic thinkers. Sometimes one wonders how credulous and naive the international community can be while dealing with rogue nations, reprobate leaders, and radical groups, in that the latter are able to so remarkably beguile and lead astray the far superior intellects of world leaders by simply playing up on their pet peeves and likes. I so wish to be proven wrong, but when we find a young discredited potentate in Central Arabia quibbling about hadith literature, talking about vague categorizations of ahad, mutawatir, and khabar hadith in an interview to Al Arabia TV channel in April this year, which hardly makes any impact in the Muslim world, but is much talked about in the Western media, to the extent that all of Saudi Arabia's crown prince's previous misdemeanors and crimes, particularly the murder of journalist Jamal al-Khashoggi, is almost instantaneously forgotten, which the Biden administration at the outset had promised would vigorously pursue. That I'm completely taken aback by that, and I'm completely dumbfounded. And the same has happened when, in the sense of haste that seems to have gripped Americans towards the end of the Trump presidency on leaving Afghanistan after 20 years and the many tours of duty by US soldiers, the top rungs of Pakistan state establishment apparently managed to convince the US leadership and the military industrial complex that the Taliban had changed, that the former terrorists had matured into the good guys and would not attack US soldiers as they withdrew in lieu of being given international respect and recognition. The prospect of a hasty exit with minimum casualties was so enticing that the US did not hesitate in taking the bait and even bypassed the Ghani government by directly negotiating with the ARC for Taliban in Doha, thereby giving it the much needed international recognition. This act in and of itself almost completely wiped out the credibility of the Ghani government, which it had barely garnered for itself in Afghanistan, and severely undercut the fledgling pride and integrity of the nascent Afghan forces. The Doha negotiations that had started towards the end of 2018 created the impression that the Trump administration had conceded that Taliban would eventually take control of Afghanistan and would form its next government. Again, the Biden administration's declaration that its force was withdrawing before the 20th anniversary of September 11 attacks was equally bizarre. 9/11 as a date is celebrated by the Taliban and all jihadi forces around the world. And when the US made that day, the cutoff point for the withdrawal of US forces, it was seen as an unfortunate acknowledgement that terrorism and indiscriminate savagery has won the day. The entire global jihadist movement, which was said to be in the worst phase of its recent history, with global terrorism index registering a fall in number of terrorist attacks by 60% since 2014, had a revival overnight. The manner in which the Pakistan military-backed Taliban forces took control of Afghanistan's main cities within a week, with little to any resistance from any quarters, a Fatah Makkah-like event that no other narrative could have provided other than what ISI-backed Taliban could accomplish within a week. Even Shia jihadist groups in Yemen and Lebanon hailed Sunni Taliban's victory. And this has revived the global jihadism in a very big way around the world. And this may be a major threat for global peace in the years and decades to come. The Taliban and the Pakistan army added one more shocking atrocity to this carefully crafted narrative. They not only marred the US exit from Afghanistan by issuing a deadline of 31st August, just to remind, and America conceded to that. This just showed that the Taliban were calling the shots. And then there was this attack in which 13 unfortunate lives of American soldiers was lost, along with 150 others at the airport as a parting shot by the Taliban, which was done in the name of the ISIS. Somehow the ISK terrorist was able to pass through all the security cover. There was no Taliban guard around there, and was able to do whatever they wanted to do. And on top of that, somehow the Taliban gave an information to America to take out some ISK people, but US forces took out some aid worker through a drone attack. So one after the other, I do not know how America was just falling for the Taliban and the Pakistan bait. The ISK has now become the boogeyman. Yes, because Khalil Haqqani, a designated terrorist from the Haqqani network, whom Amrullah Saleh claims has close ties with ISK, was in charge of Kabul security on the fateful day of the airport bombings. We all know that ISIS base in Syria and Iraq has been more or less wiped out. And there is now a shadowy caliph whom nobody virtually knows about. His name is Hashimi al-Qurayshi, too convenient an appellate that presents him as a Banu Hashim and of a Quraysh tribe, so makes him a legitimate descendant of the Prophet, but we have not seen him. How much of an affiliate of that devastated central headquarters of the ISIS could the Afpak ISK be? Especially when the Taliban claims it has itself wiped out ISK forces out of its supposed bases in the Nangarhar provinces. The fact that ISK is now the red herring that the ISI is using to show Taliban in a good light. So now we have the good terrorist in Taliban and the bad terrorist in the ISK. This is another duplicitous narrative propagated to the credulous global audience. It is said that fighters like Abu Qatada and Zarqawi in Al-Qaeda never accepted the Taliban as an emirate in the 1990s because of the latter's Muqallid Hanafi beliefs, which were opposed by the Ghair Muqallid Salafi jihadists, Al-Qaeda low-ranking officials, much to the chagrin of the pan-Islamist Bin Laden, Abu Musab al-Suhi, and Zawahiri. This Muqallid, Ghair Muqallid theological splinter is said to be the reason for the Taliban-ISIS divide. But this narrative is also overblown. The uneducated Afghan jihadists and even their rabid, half-baked mullahs are hardly conversant in these complex theological matters. The majority of so-called ISK leaders are merely dissidents of the Afghan Taliban or the TTP, which itself arguably are not two organizations, but the same group. Even many of the killings of the hapless Shia Hazaras carried out in the name of ISK are reported to be actually the workings of Lashkar-e-Jangavi, closely linked to the TTP. The leader of the ISK himself, Shahab al-Muhajir, was until recently a mid-level commander of the Haqqani network, which is the ISI's interface of handling the Taliban. Thus, the ISK, for whatever its present strength, and for the little smattering of foreign fighters, with some now coming even from India, can be used as a convenient cover by the ISI and the Taliban to launch attacks on other countries in the region and beyond. So they could carry out attacks in the cover of deniability, and ISI would be willing to take responsibility for any random act of terror, given its present situation. If the Taliban fails to govern, which is a very likely scenario, even this false facade of veneer of moderation which it has taken on will start peeling off. In fact, the process has already started. In the name of a moderate and an inclusive government, we have a prime minister in Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund, who authorized the bombing of the Buddha cliff statues in 2001. And Sirajuddin Haqqani as interior minister, who is a designated terrorist, who attacked the Indian embassy in 2008. And the FBI has put a bounty of $5 million on his head. This is no moderate Taliban. In fact, this is a Taliban that is so heavily manipulated by the ISI and Pak military that it chose the day 15th of August for the seizure of Kabul. We have credible intelligence to ascertain that that day was purposely chosen as it coincides with India's Independence Day, which falls on the 15th of August. Who else would have wanted it to fall on that day? Not the Afghans, not the US, but the Pakistani ISI. Thus, the script of ISI is writ large on the state of Afghanistan today and what may happen in the future. Again, when the Taliban faced a long internal tussle over cabinet formation, it was resolved only by the visit of Pakistan's ISI chief, General Faiz Hamid, to the Afghan capital on the 4th of September 2021, that settled matters in favor of the old familiar terrorist cronies of Pak intelligence agencies. Within 3 days, the announcement on the formation of a new government was made without the pretense of any inclusivity. And now the ISI, through the Dawood Ibrahim criminal network, has brazenly plotted to attack several Indian cities during the upcoming Hindu festival season. A massive plot has been uncovered and a major module busted by the Indian security forces operating across several cities. Is this the beginning of a major chapter in cross-border terrorism unveiling in India? I would not even wish to speculate. The world must realize that the Pakistan military and its proxy good terrorists do not just spread terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, but they have now become a clear and present danger to regional security and global peace. These are not bold claims made by yours truly, but are the views of several US congressmen who are asking US Secretary of State Blinken for his resignation as we speak over a fatally flawed and poorly executed US withdrawal. And now even Blinken is admitting that Pakistan was involved in harboring members of the Taliban, including the Haqqanis, and has called on Pakistan to deny legitimacy to the Taliban unless they meet international demands. Well, we can only hope now that the US is out of Afghanistan, and now it would show the political will and strategic acumen to take on Pakistan, the Taliban, and their proxy groups in the region that are a clear and present danger to international security. And it would not leave the matter to dubious global players like China, who do not follow the humanitarian and liberal values necessary for a just global order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rashid. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. You started with the difference between Hanif Qad and Salafi Wahhabi, and how to the Taliban and ISI linkage, and that is a security to the not only India, but it's in the South Asian region. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I will take the question. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Ernest Gunasekara Rockwell, the director of the consortium, for his comments. Dr. Rockwell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists. Fantastic presentations. I don't have a whole heck of a lot to add to that. I mean, Dr. Rashid stole most of my thunder. I'm one of the ones who always likes to beat the ISI over the head. I would definitely reiterate, the close ties that the Haqqani network has to all of the different players in Afghanistan and in Pakistan is something that needs to be, talked about frequently. The Haqqani network itself is prescribed by the Department of State as a foreign terrorist organization. And as Dr. Rashid mentioned, you've got at least 3 Haqqanis serving in high-level positions within the new Taliban government. In addition to Siraj Haqqani, being the Minister of Interior for the Taliban. You've got Khalil Rahman Haqqani, who's in charge of the security. Both of these guys have got $5 million warrants on their head, basically. And then the younger guy, Anas Haqqani, is one of the Taliban's chief diplomats. These guys are all known terrorists. And, I too bemoan the fact that, Western governments, including my own, have, sat down across the table from these folks. I grew up in a day when we talked about we don't negotiate with terrorists, but that's exactly what we've done. And now we've handed the government of Afghanistan over to these folks. Pakistan's not even making any effort any longer to pretend to be friends of the United States. Imran Khan, the prime minister, recently stated that the U.S. misunderstands the Haqqani. Sure, we do. And also stated that he would not have taken our side if during the launching of the 2001 war if he'd been prime minister. Okay, that doesn't sound very much like, I don't know about you guys, but allies and partners, that's not the kinds of things that they say. So maybe we're witnessing the fact that the Pakistani rhetoric is actually matching up with what Pakistan's doing behind the scenes for a change. That at least would be refreshing, have some clear-cut discussion coming out of what that means. One of my concerns, if the Haqqani network is the ISA conduit, in Afghanistan, and it's got its feet in both of these camps. It's got its feet in ISI, it's got its feet in ISIS-K, it's got its feet in the Taliban, and it's getting its marching orders from Islamabad. It's pretty clear how things are going to go, right? One of the things that I would like, Dr. Rashid maybe and Dr. Siddiqa to maybe address, are we going to see a spreading of the ideology that's being promoted amongst the Taliban and ISIS-K? Is that going to spread throughout Central Asia and South Asia in a fashion similar to what we saw after the 1979 revolution in Iran? Because obviously that would be of tremendous concern, not just to the West, but to China and Xinjiang and Russia with Chechnya and its other Muslim-dominated regions. Chechens are amongst those foreign fighters that have been discussed, and they've been there since before we got there. And to my knowledge, there's still some of them there and getting their training and cutting their teeth and getting on the ground experience in fighting. And what happens if they go back then to Chechnya and with the training that they've got? Obviously, President Putin would be rather concerned about that as well. So those are things that I would kind of like to see some of the discussion go about. But rather than taking up a whole lot of time, I'm just going to defer to the questions. We've got a ton of them over in the chat box. And, I hand it over to people that are far more subject matter expert in this than I am.
Thank you, Doc. So now we will move towards the question and answer sessions. I have three package questions from my side, and we have a lot of questions in the chat box. First, I would like to take a question to Dr. Hayat Alvi. Like we all know about the ISIS-K associated with the Taliban and Pakistan via Haqqani network. And Khalil Haqqani, who is now a minister in Taliban government, has had a 5 million bounty on his head. I would like to ask that what parameters standard should be the United States or international community insist upon in return for the recognition of the Taliban? Can the West accept a government comprised of individuals like Haqqani who are wanted criminals?
Thank you, Indu. Short answer is we've done it before, right? So we've had the PLO. Once the PLO recognized the state of Israel in the late 1980s, and then this all transitioned under George Bush Sr. With the Madrid Conference, 1990, and then the Oslo Accords in 1991, and what we refer to as the handshake on the White House lawn between Yasser Arafat and Itzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres. And at the time, President Clinton looking over them and applauding this reconciliation between the parties. So Whereas in the 1980s and 70s, the word PLO was almost criminal in the United States. It became, by early 1990s, a partner in peace negotiations, and given the status and recognized as the status of the political representation of the PLO over Palestinians. The other one we've done is the IRA in Ireland, where we have, again, engaged as third-party negotiators to arbitrate between the IRA and its counterpart, and led to a power-sharing deal in Northern Ireland. So this is not unprecedented. However, let me point out very quickly that, and Bruce Rydell, who's a terrorism scholar, Bruce Rydell has pointed this out in a Brookings article, that it's really what happened with the Trump administration right before the transition to the Biden administration that pulled the rug out from beneath the successor administration, in this case Biden, when the Trump administration in Doha did the talks, the peace negotiations, and I put that in quotes, sidestepping the Afghan government at the time of Ashraf Ghani completely and doing bilateral talks between the United States delegation and the Taliban. And again, that was with the Trump administration. So the entire game as it was played when the Biden administration came into the White House was completely, let's just call it impotent politically in dealing with any other entity, including the Afghan government, upon having taken the seat in the White House under the Biden administration. So thank you for the question.
Can I come in for a minute here?
Sure.
See, I would argue that perhaps one of the mistakes that the US would be making is to look at the Haqqani network or the Taliban from the same lens as the PLO or IRA. Let's also not forget an important difference, that IRA and PLO were they were not Islamist organizations. I mean, they had an Islamic character, but they were not Islamists. They were not pushing political Islam. They were pursuing a very territorial objective that should be kept in mind. Haqqani network, on the other hand, although the first generation Taliban were very focused on Afghanistan, but they edge onto pan-Islamism as well. There is a match here. I mean, there is a mixing of both. So we cannot be definite when we have Haqqani network in control of government and the state in Afghanistan, whether they will remain, yes, they will remain in Afghanistan, but will we be then able to contain them in Afghanistan? They will have an impact on the region, definite. They may not, like Al-Qaeda, think of the 2 points I want to make. Firstly, that in a short to medium term, they may not desire or plan an attack, in the West, in the US, it's anything comparable to 9/11. Yet they will constantly be feeding an ideology that will have an impact. I mean, it will be part of a pan-Islamist, kind of ideological map. Haqqani network is not going to revert from that. And there, I think it will be a mistake to constantly harp on a major difference between ISK Salafism and Hanafism. With due respect to Dr. Adil Rashid, let me add that it's not that the Salafis don't accept Abu Hanifa. The Salafi theology is that the Salafis accept Quran and Hadith exegesis as the source of any law. What they say that what Salafis argue is that they do not accept any Imam, the four Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Hanbal. They do not accept, their interpretation of the Quran and Hadith as the guiding principle. What they're saying, what their argument is, and that's where the difference is. However, when it comes to principles of Islam from Sharia itself, there is sufficient amount of negotiation. There are commonalities that you'd continue to find. They'll keep negotiating with each other. So this emphasis, and I think that the problem lies. Indeed, we need to ask questions to the Pakistani state, but more than that, we also need to ask questions to the American state, which has very deliberately kind of withdrawn and now seems very keen on playing up, walking into this whole argument about there being a difference between ISK and Taliban, and accepting the argument that Taliban are very different from ISK and therefore they can be partnered with.
Thank you. Dr. Adil, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Aisha that probably the blame also falls on the US for the mess which has been created. And we cannot just squarely blame Pakistan for all of this. But I would just say that when it comes to the other, the theological issue is that Abu Hanifa is the person who was Ahl al-Ra'i and not an Ahl al-Hadith, and he made a lot of innovations in his and use of qiyas, which the Salafis particularly dislike. And that was the real rub, as it were. But that is a theological debate. We don't need to go into that. But the other thing is that it is, when Dr. Gunasekara is talking about America, now that this vermin may spread to other parts of Central Asia and China and even Iran, it seems that perhaps American interests are also to an extent served in that many of its arch rivals will now be finding it difficult to manage the heat. Why America should have been the party which was taking on the entire burden. But the thing is that Pakistan has played, to my mind, the most prominent role and being the mastermind behind this. And we should give credit to it for that. And there's no doubt about it. And it is very surprising that a person who comes on Indian television, Qamar Cheema, even said that India should take tuition from Pakistani generals on how they have masterminded the whole situation. So there is a sense of triumphalism when it comes to Pakistan, which it cannot openly talk about. So that is why it seems that Pakistan has done something big here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. Dr. Aisha, I would like to take your comments on this because it's a kind of like the security aspect of from the Indian side and mainly for the South Asian region. So you have written extensively on Pakistan's military, economy, or industrial complex. Your book is on that. So how do you see that Pakistan is or ISI is involved in this funding and to this terrorist organization, or maybe it's a Taliban and now it's in the government, or the ISIS-K. And like the, would you like to say something on the Pakistan drone attack on the Panjshir Valley recently?
I think it's let's not make this discussion comical, because I don't think there is any evidence of Pakistani drones or Air Force joining the attack on Panjshir. The Taliban were kind of had sufficient strength to do it themselves. There are a couple of things which I would like to point out. Firstly, I think this is a time for serious debate, not for propaganda. And propaganda is on both sides. It's on Indian side as well. And I think countries that do that kind of propaganda, probably building a narrative is important, but it also kind of takes the discussion away from where the discussion should be. So I think what's important to understand with Panjshir is that Panjshiris are continuing to fight. And the problem is that the Taliban themselves are not a huge military here. And in order to, they can win a battle in Panjshir, but may not be able to control it forever. So there will be resistance, and there is resistance to Taliban control in Afghanistan, at least in some pockets. I think where Pakistan is trying to build the narrative, what Pakistan is, the narrative that Pakistan is trying to build, which, by the way, is unfortunately being bought by the American, is that Taliban represent all Pashtuns, and that Taliban are very popular, are the popular choice in Afghanistan. I would question that. If we were to hold elections in Afghanistan, I'm not sure that Taliban will win elections. People have issues with the Taliban. People in Afghanistan have issues with Taliban. But the important thing is that for the longest, I remember my conversation with, General Rashid Qureshi, who was in 2002 Director General of ISPR then, and of the Musharraf government. And I remember him telling me, he said that, look, we are engaged in a conversation with the Americans, and we've told the Americans that, we'll hand you the Arabs, will hand you the Uzbeks, but allow us, that is Pakistan, to deal with the Taliban. And Americans followed that formula for a while. The actual confrontation between Taliban and Americans started to take place around, I would say, 2007, 2008. Before that, that friction was very contained, and that's when America also got conscious of the Taliban threat. However, I think it's too late kind of a situation, because I think that was also a time when the whole debate of kind of withdrawing from Afghanistan started, and looking for options. United States has gone for the easiest option, which is handing over, instead of investing in, which it has begun to do. Instead of investing in a governance system, investing in a political government, in political structures, in political parties, building multiple political parties in Afghanistan, United States went for the easiest thing, which is, go back and talk to the Taliban. But the problem which I think needs to be understood is that this is not something which will solve the Afghanistan problem. The Afghanistan problem and pan-Islamism, which hides behind it, is going to strike again.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqa. So now I would like to take the questions from Someone has raised the hands here. You want to speak, Mr. Vilayat Khan? You want to say your question?
Yes, madam. I have a question for Dr. Rockwell. But before that, I want to say about the issue from the very beginning, which may seem very common.
I would
which
like
may
to say, please ask your question. We have to take the more questions from the chat box. If you have a question
Okay.
directly to our panelists, please say it.
Okay. My question is directed to Dr. Rockwell. Given the current situations, Doctor, what do you think is the ultimate solution to the Afghan crisis right now? Do you think that there should be another war against Taliban, or do you think there should be a political solution to the problem?
Well, first of all, I would say, the crisis in Afghanistan has been going on not just for 20 years. It's been going on for, most of the creation of the world. And obviously, I don't argue that there's a military solution at this point. Having withdrawn, we have, pretty much, lost any credibility that we have, I think, in Afghanistan and probably in the region for going back in. The fact that we, did such an abysmal job with the withdrawal, the fact that we have left behind, some of our translators and our other human intelligence sources, it would hamstring any effort that we made to go back in there. In fact, when Major Caruso was talking about, the possibility of special forces going back into country to take care of certain situations, who the heck's going to help them? Our special forces, when they go in, they're kind of dependent upon some degree of assistance from locals. But if in the aftermath of the debacle that we've just witnessed, you'd have to be out of your mind as a local Afghani to give any assistance to American forces going back in there, no matter how much you want them to succeed, because there's no guarantee that you're going to get any assistance from us, once we've accomplished the mission. And the drone strikes too that he mentioned, I think Dr. Rashid mentioned that those drone strikes are not as accurate as what we'd like them to be. The government claimed that we took out the ISIS-K terrorists responsible for attacks on our forces while we were withdrawing. And as Dr. Rashid mentioned, there's some speculation that instead we took out people that were actually on our side. And Senator Rand Paul was very adamant about we ought not be doing these drone strikes until we get to a point where we're dang sure who we're taking out. So the idea that there's any military solution at this point, I think, is a moot point. It's not going to happen. As far as the political solution, it'd be awfully tricky. Obviously, I think it's imperative upon the United States and its allies and others to make sure that we contain the cancer that is the Taliban, that is the Haqqani network, that is ISIS-K, and make sure that it doesn't spread beyond, and incentivize other groups within Afghanistan to be viable characters, whether it be Mr. Mossad and his folks up in Panjshir, or whether it be other rational actors that are in the region, although some of those are few and far between to find. But how we go about doing that while bullets are still flying in a place where we no longer have any assets is another question to be addressed. Do we help Tajikistan support the efforts in Panjshir? And if we do, does that open us up to accusations that we're not living up to our end of the Doha agreement? And the Taliban government's already claiming that we're not living up to our end of the Doha agreement. And if that's the case, then they're not going to feel obliged to do so themselves either. So I think there has to be a political solution. What the heck that looks like, I don't know. That's for people way well above my pay grade. And unfortunately, given the current state of our diplomatic efforts in the region, I'm not sure that there's anybody in Washington, D.C. that understands how to do it either.
Thank you, Doc.
You're muted, Indu.
Thank you, Doc. I have a question for Major Phil Caruso. If he is here, else see it. The 9/11 when the Taliban was in government in 2001, and Al Qaeda was a terrorist organization, was present in the region. Now the Taliban is once again in power, and the Al Qaeda and ISIS-K are present as a terrorist outfit. Seemingly, their connections among these various groups. Do you see any parallels in the pre-war or post-war scenarios? And do you see any early warning signs? I think Major Caruso is not here. So Dr. Alvi, would you like to say on this?
Yeah, sure. We've come full circle. This is what I call it, the full circle with Afghanistan, unfortunately. And Dr. Rockwell was completely correct in pointing out that this whole debacle started with the Soviet invasion in 1979. And the poor Afghan civilians have not seen recourse or any kind of peace and stability since then. And what is the full circle? Now, you mentioned the Panjshir Valley and the resistance. There is a potential for Afghanistan to fall into civil war again. I hope that's not the case, but it seems to me that the variables are there for the potential for civil war. I see the re-empowerment of the Taliban, and even with more, I don't want to use the word legitimacy, but more power, political power than they had in 1996, as actually what Dr. Aisha pointed out earlier, an empowerment of pan-Islamism, and more troubling to us as an actual Orthodox Sunni axis, AXIS. How so? You got Taliban in power in Afghanistan, you have Pakistan with its Orthodox and some very extremist Sunni elements, and you have the support of Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, to my earlier answer on US recognizing the Taliban, if you look at the US-Saudi relationship, although Saudi Arabia is a state actor, not a non-state actor, it's equally, if not more, extremist in its Wahhabi ideology, which is a theocratic national ideology for Saudi Arabia, which is a contradiction to what the United States has in terms of its promotion of democracy and human rights as values and principles. So what do I see here? I see the Sunni Orthodox axis with the rise and empowerment of the Taliban in 2021. And I also see this as part and parcel of, because of Iran and what it's doing and its, you can say, Shia agenda, perhaps we're looking at Islam's own 30 years war.
Thank you, Dr. Alvi. We have Mr. in here. He's registered. And sir, do you want to say, do you have a question? Please.
Yes, I have a question. Basically, I would like to add that, to that Sunni triangle that your previous speaker, Ms. Ali, was talking about it. Alvi, sorry. You can add Turkey and at the same time some southern Persian Gulf sheikdoms to that group. And at the same, or the other thing that my major question was this: the ideological differences between ISIS and Taliban is fine, understandable, and so forth. So on. But there is a geopolitical interest in here that none of speakers discuss this or address it, especially the Trans-Afghan pipeline that basically changed the balance of power in favor of the Pakistan. If the Central Asian oil and gas move from Afghanistan to Pakistani ports, so it will change the picture altogether. And then the other one is the Chinese access to Afghanistan, not just because of the natural resources, but at the same time is the transportation that for BRI that will change the picture as well. So if by any chance anyone in panel can address this, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I come in on this?
Thank you. Yeah, sure, Dr. Siddiqa.
See, there is a lot being made about China coming in and taking, filling the gap left by the United States. That is, again, a thought. I mean, that could be, that is a possibility, but I'm not sure that China is super excited about what it sees happening. It has Uyghur Muslims, it has a Muslim problem in its own territory. And therefore, it is at best, it is going to be cautious. So is Russia. I mean, in fact, one country which seems to be going along, with this development in Afghanistan is Russia. Russia with a lot of care. Russia would probably want China to invest resources in Afghanistan, but I would say that China is going to be very careful. There has been this talk about gas pipelines and oil pipelines and the rest of it. But I think that with Taliban in Afghanistan, and unless there is a major shift in their thinking, and unless and Taliban are not the only actors there. I mean, let's not forget about that. There is Al-Qaeda, there is Daesh, and there is Taliban. And within Taliban, there are groups, which have differences. I mean, there is the Haqqani network, there is Mullah Baradar of, the Kandharis. They have their own friction as well. We're not looking at a consolidated Afghanistan here. So, with that kind of a situation, I mean, although Pakistan has always hoped for a very long time to have that kind of influence in Afghanistan, which allows it to then access Central Asia. But I don't see that happening, number one. And secondly, I think what my concern is that with Taliban, one of the things I think that we have not spoken about, that with Taliban next door in Afghanistan, the more they consolidate power, my fear is that the more threatened will Pakistan be. All the pan-Islamist organizations, I mean, already if you look at the literature which is being produced, all pan-Islamist extremist organizations have already started to talk. Pakistan will be threatened, India will be threatened. In fact, the entire region will get shaken up. Now, with that kind of situation, I don't see, a lot of excitement and a lot of, move forward as far as trade and business opportunities are concerned.
Dr. Sidga, I'm totally understand what are you talking about. But it is very early to see that how Taliban will react sooner or later. Yeah, there is a possibility of the Pakistan and India being under threat, or in even the Central Asia. But we have to see that how this new politics works in Afghanistan, then reevaluate the situation. I'm saying that in the best of the world, best of the situation that we may be able to see, that the Pakistan can stabilize Afghanistan based on and then get access to the Central Asia in competition with India. So it depends on what will happen next 1 or 2 years. Then we will see that how things works. I'm hoping for best, but no, it's the reality that that will be seen in the next 1 or 2 years.
Thank you, Mr.
That's all.
Azin, for your comments. Now I call the Imran, Mr. Imran, who raised his hand. Please say your question.
Thank you very much. I'm Imran from the Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad. Any panelists can answer my question. It appears that Pakistan is banking on reform Taliban narrative and has asked to incentivize Taliban. And on the other hand, we see Taliban is not one, they are divided. And Pakistan's security is also on stake, as non-state actors using Taliban card can create troubles for Pakistan. So do you think, especially I would like to ask Dr. Aisha, do you think this is a rational approach of Pakistan?
Can you hear me? Am I?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, all right, okay. See, from a larger security perspective, it doesn't appear rational. I mean, it has its limitations. From a military perspective, from a very tactical, short-term military perspective, I think that's the current strategy is where Pakistan feels that that the move, the action is very logical. It has wanted for a very long time to expand its influence and find commonality. I think what we see here is that in the past couple of decades, there is a change in Pakistan, and in some respects, it seems that Afghanistan is mirroring Pakistan and vice versa, especially as far as ideology and its politics is concerned. Rationally, I think, from a rational perspective, I have issues with this strategy. I think you would agree with it that it has its limitations. Yet the kind of ideological political direction that is being imagined by the policymakers, I think from their perspective, their formula is rational. So it's different rationalities. They have their own, we have our own.
Can I come in
I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha. Yeah, Dr. Adil.
Yes, without I'm being careful because we have many Pakistanis over here, and some of my comments, that is the problem. When you create a Frankenstein monster, it comes back at you. There's a blowback effect to that, and that is what we are seeing. And when you have a country which is based on a religion, and then there are people who say that, no, you have not followed the religion to the T. And the Taliban is the conscience keeper in a way, and is trying to poke at Pakistan that how Islamic are you after so many years. That creates a problem within Pakistan. And the problem which we are going to see perhaps in the future is the Talibanization of Pakistan. And also we are finding now that some of the Barelvi groups, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik and others, they are also becoming extremely radicalized. The Sufis are also becoming radicalized. And that is a big problem. The other issue is that I think the Taliban story may be the flavor of a month or 2 months. After that, there may be new world crisis emerging somewhere else. And at that time, nobody would be out there trying to fund the Taliban, Afghanistan and give the foreign aid to Afghanistan. And things may start imploding very badly in Afghanistan. And suddenly all this very nice words which are coming out from Afghanistan may end up, and there could be a civil war-like situation. And that would be a big mess for Pakistan and for the rest of the region. And we have to be very careful about that. It is indeed, I think that unfortunately every 10 years, it started with 9/11, then it started with 2011 Arab Spring, and now in 2021, these are very significant landmark events, and we'll have to be tread very carefully here.
May I add something?
Thank you, Dr. Adil.
May I add something, please?
Sure, Doctor.
Right, so what I see is that up to this point, Pakistan and China have played a superb chess game in Afghanistan. And where I am sitting from here watching, what's left to be observed from now going forward is, in my view, who's going to do who's bidding. China and Pakistan are going to do bidding for each other within Afghanistan. And I think Dr. Adil hit the point on the nose completely with his comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alvi, for adding the dimension here.
Just one very brief comment. I'm not sure about who's doing who's bidding here. That I would really want to come back on that. Because right now, if we look at the situation of how it has evolved, US has left Afghanistan and left it with the Taliban and all other organizations there. I mean, even if Daesh problem is solved, even if the Al-Qaeda problem is solved, Taliban, largely ideologically, there will be the same results. I mean, as far as women are concerned, as far as Hazaras are concerned, as far as other minorities are concerned, they will feel the heat. Situation is not going to be different. What brings me to this question that, I would really like to question the hypothesis. I agreed completely that Pakistan is making the mistake of supporting the Taliban and believes that there will be peace in the region with Taliban there. But I would want to question this argument that perhaps China is completely on board in this plan. I think every regional actor had wanted to get America out of the region. They have managed to, have that wish fulfilled. Yet, there is actually no long-term recipe for peace emanating from Afghanistan. And I don't see China benefiting at all from the current situation in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqa. Yeah, my argument here or my comment here echo with Dr. Rashid and Dr. Alvi, when we are like this smoke or it's not a smoke, it's a fire, it's like where is in Afghanistan, I don't know how much it will be have a repercussion with the region, but definitely it's going to be much more for the Pakistan. As the Pakistan Prime Minister in yesterday's CNN interview, he spoke that Al-Haqqani is a tribe. So how much and how and what extent they are supporting. So, and what's the condition of Pakistan economically, politically, at humanitarian on the ground. So it's the more repercussion for those who are supporting directly and indirectly. Now I would like to invite Dr. Gunasekara Rockwell for the closing comments. Thank you. Doc, please.
Thank you, Indu. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for their participation. The panelists, fantastic. I love Indu. You put this together, and you really put together a very unique panel that provided varying perspectives. I always hate coming to one of these sessions where everybody's on the same page, and it just becomes an echo chamber. Today, we heard a lot of diverse opinions about what's going on. We had, very nuanced perspectives on, things from theology to, geopolitics and looking at it from, the U.S. perspective, looking at it from the Indian perspective, Pakistani perspective. I think that was all very beneficial, and I think it really made for a very strong and enjoyable discussion. I would again encourage all of our participants today and those out in the audience who wish to contribute to the special issue that we're putting together on Afghanistan that'll be out in December. The deadline for submissions for that is November 5th. And getting some of these opinions out there in print, I think would be of huge benefit. And for those of you who aren't that familiar with the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs, we have about 24,000 subscribers. We've been putting out a lot of special issues this year. Next year, we're moving to a bi-monthly publication battle rhythm. So we'll be every 2 months, we'll be putting out a new issue so that we can move away from these special issues, which kind of stop being special if you do them all the time. But I think that, getting these kinds of ideas into that special issue would make it a much stronger issue, and it helped make the case in capitals around the Indo-Pacific where we are red, that there has to be some kind of international solution to this problem that transcends the U.S. versus China, the India versus Pakistan narratives that are out there. If we really want to contain this cancer, we all have to band together to some degree to do so. And because it is a threat to all of us. It's a threat to Western civilization. It's a threat to Pakistan. It's a literal threat to Pakistan. It's a threat to the security issues in Kashmir and in other parts of India. It's a threat in Chechnya and other Muslim-dominated areas in Russia. It's a threat to Xinjiang in China. We all have to find some kind of common ground if we want to hold the Taliban's feet to the fire. Make sure to, if the Taliban's going to be the government, we need to make sure that they are at least successful in containing the ideology and not letting it spread, outside of that, and incentivizing them to want to do that. And that might be the tricky part right there. But at any rate, again, thank you to the panelists. I don't want to get out here and pontificate in the conclusion. You're not supposed to do that, right? But thank you, Indu, for putting this together. Thank you, panelists, for a fantastic discussion. Thank you to our many our viewers and those that ask questions, very pointed questions, fantastic. We will have this up on the YouTube pages for both the consortium and the journal. We're going to have to go back and record a little bit of stuff that we missed because we had a little problem with the handoff in the hosting and whatnot, and forgot to hit the recording button early on. But we'll take care of that, and I'll stitch everything together. We should have that up hopefully sometime next week. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us with questions, concerns, and whatnot. So again, thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Indu.
Everyone, thank you, Dr. Aisa Siddiqa, Major Phil Khorasan, Dr. Ayat Halvi, Dr. Adil Rashid for a wonderful presentation and adding the dimensions of your perspective here. And I thank you all attendees who put the questions, and some of questions we here are not taken, but next time we are coming very soon for the next roundtable discussion, and the next month on maybe on the war on terror. I am just putting it together. So stay tuned in. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you and bye-bye.